Hey, what is up, guys, and welcome back to League Racing. This time it's Silverstone, and as I'd mentioned in the last video, this is one of my favorite tracks, and I was pretty confident coming up into this weekend. So just had to keep a clean race and not make too many mistakes, and I knew that I had the pace to be towards the top end of the field. But this race after midway was supposed to be a wet race, and rain was forecast around lap 12 or 13 as we come on to one of our qualifying laps, which we were going pretty well with. But yeah, it was just through maggots and beckets. I just was not expecting that car to simply hold that line going into that section, and that ruined this lap for me, so I had to abandon that. But coming back to the rain, I think if you've watched previous videos, I've always mentioned that I'm not too quick in the wet, so the strategy was to just push all through the first stint and then just to damage limitation towards the second end. But let me take you around for the fastest lap, which I did. So out of the last corner, maximum straight line speed, and then going up into turn 1, easy flat, take a lot of that curve, and then T2 is easy flat as well into T3, brake when the curve starts, and then carry fourth gear, carry the momentum through that corner, and then down to third for this T4 before we come on to the Wellington straight. Very important to get the exit right. I think there was still some time for me to have on that exit, but yeah, far from ideal. But on to Brooklyn now, and before 50 just brake and turn in, and I had a lot of traffic through this section. Ideally you want to carry fifth gear, but yeah, it just was a distraction. And then Luffield, you're supposed to use the rear end to turn the car more, but yeah, still some time through that section. But now it was very important for me to get the next two sectors right. So coming up into Cobbs, easy flat, but important to not scrub too much straight line speed as we cut the corner there. But now watch this, we have one of the most beautiful sequences ever. So we have Maggots, Beckett's, down one gear, almost flat through Beckett's 2, and then set up Chapel. And then very important to have maximum straight line speed through that section, because you have this long hangar straight in front of you, and I think in no other car can that section be taken any more quickly. But we have Stowe now, down to gears, and just as you get the whiff of the apex, just floor the throttle and hope the car will stick, and it usually does. And coming up into Vale, brake when the curve starts on the right, and it's just about maintaining maximum minimum speed through that section, and you will have a decent lap. So we come around to do a 1 minute 24.5, and I knew that it was not an ideal lap. I think with the setup change due to the rain forecast halfway into the race, it was a bit tricky. I had to change a few things, and yeah, I think it cost me a tenth or two, but it was just not a very fine quali lap from my side as well. So to the race strategy now, and I think it was a pretty straightforward. I just told myself that I had to push for the first 10 laps on these soft tires when they would be good, and hopefully create a gap behind us to have some room when the wet conditions do arrive. But for now, we have 5 lights in Silverstone and it's lights out, and not the best of starts from our side, but I knew that I just had to stick to the guy in front as we put the car in lean, and just no need of attacking him or anything. Just it's always a DRS train around Silverstone, so I had to just play it calmly and just follow other cars and see what happens behind us. But coming out of T3, you can see there has been an incident behind us and multiple cars are piling, so I knew that this was my moment to just break free from the drivers behind, and if we could just get 1 second of a gap behind, then we would be free from their DRS, and that would be a very beneficial thing in the long run. So coming into Luffield, and I knew I just had to stick to the guy in front, and if I could just use his DRS to break free from the pack behind, it would be a very decent start indeed. So coming up into Cops for the very first time, not taking it in 8th and just shifting down to 7th, because for the first time when you do it, you're just carrying so much fuel, it's always better to be cautious. And now for the very first time through Maggots, Beckett's, and then Chapel. So I knew that the car ahead was going to push, so I was also very aggressive on the ERS usage as well. So this was, I think, the first mistake which I made, and I just left overtake open and I forgot about it coming up into Stowe. So ideally you don't want to do that, but coming up at the end of lap 2 now, and as you can see, I've pushed a lot behind him, and you can see that with my ERS usage, and just sticking behind him as close as possible, and we do our fastest lap of the race. So that is a 28.6, which was about 3 to 2 tenths slower than what I would have done on the dry setup, but it's not like I could have done anything about that. So coming up into T3 and T4, and just now I felt like that I was kind of being slowed down through that section, and I was just kind of quicker through the slow corners than the car in front, and I knew that it was going to cost me time. So coming up to Maggots and Beckett's, and I tell my engineer on the radio that I'm going to overtake the Ferrari in front on this lap. So it was just all about using this ERS, and I knew that he would not make it too tough for me. So we get the move done before the braking zone for Stowe, and it's just a comfortable move into P1. And now the objective was to just try to to stretch this gap as far as I can through the next 7 or 8 laps, and just try to get out of the Ferrari's DRS. But I knew that that would be a very difficult task because it's just very easy to stick to the car in front with DRS, as we do the fastest lap of the race at 28.4, and on the very next lap we do a 28.5. So just about maintaining consistency now, and through all of that I think you can see behind us the Ferrari has not fallen behind, and he was still very well into our DRS. And although we are setting personal best sectors through all of these laps, I think he's just following very closely and very well behind us. So on to lap 7 and coming up into Stowe, I think I knew that he was going to make a move, and just to cover off the Mercedes behind, I knew that there was no point for us to battle. So I kind of lifted off and let him go, because there was no point battling with each other and letting the Mercedes get close, because he was on the medium tires, and that was looking like the more optimal strategy. Now as you can see, we almost lose the rear end of the car because these tires are now reaching towards the end of their life cycle. And just on the very next lap you can see through Stowe, there's just so much change in the weather. So almost out of nowhere the clouds have started to arrive, and we were kind of edging towards the end of the life cycle of these soft tires. So I knew that if the rain started right now, it would be optimal strategy for us, as we would be pitting anyway. So coming up into Luffield on lap 9, and you can see that we're closing behind, but I knew that there was no point overtaking into Luffield because that takes a lot of your time. And I think both of us knew, myself and the Ferrari in front, that our fight was with the Mercedes behind us on medium tires first, and then maybe towards the end of the race we could swap or just have a go at each other. But right now it was just all about avoiding the Mercedes behind. And as you can see behind, the Mercedes has just caught up with us within a second, and he was into our DRS. And I think now I decided to just get past the Ferrari also, because if I could just put a car between myself and the Mercedes, it would just take him ever so slightly longer to get close to us, and that might buy us very crucial time towards the end of the race. So coming up on to lap 10 now, and we're up doing about the same time as our personal best, and on to lap 11 now, and you can see the first drops of rain that are beginning to fall now. So this was kind of good news, because I wanted it to rain as soon as possible, and just watching it starting to drizzle ever so slightly was kind of a positive for me. But I kept on checking with the race engineer if it would be the right time to shift to the inters, but I think this lap there was just not enough water on track to make the inters the fastest tire. So I knew that I had to carry on for one more lap, and I just needed it to start raining very heavily as soon as possible. But now coming on to the Wellington straight, and for some reason I thought the Mercedes was going for a move on my inside, so that kind of compromised my line. And coming up into Brooklands, I knew there was no point fighting this position, because it would mean that I would start losing time to the cars behind. And thankfully we had about 2.2 seconds of a gap to the Ferrari behind, so he had fallen down, and I just wanted to stay in the DRS of the Mercedes in front. But finally coming up to the end of lap 13, and as you can see, the grip has slightly worsened, so the car is just understeering. And although this was kind of early, I knew that I had to come in and pit, because these tires had about 70% wear, and you can see the Ferrari behind had a much faster pit entry. So I think he gained a lot of time, about more than a second through that section, by just braking late. And we come out in P3, and the Mercedes has about a 32-second gap to us. So I knew that just strategy had played into his hands, and the pit time is about 27 to 28 seconds. So I knew that he would come out about 5 seconds in front of us if it continued like this. But he also was on the slick tires in these relatively wet conditions, so I knew that there was scope for some mistake on his part, but he just maintained the pace very well and did not make any mistakes. So we're still in front of the Ferrari, but just by a second, and I knew that everybody behind me could possibly close up to us very quickly, because I'm not fast or comfortable in the wet situations. As you can see, we're just not taking the ideal lines, and we're kind of just struggling to find that grip. And I just knew that I had to be really cautious of the exits which I get, because there are a lot of straights on this track, and although I can just manage to be the car in front through these twisty sections, I had to be the faster car on the straight, so I was just focusing on the exits more than the entry, and I knew that catching up to P1, to the Mercedes in front, would be a tough task, because he was just clearly the faster car in these conditions as well. But coming up into Stowe, I think this was the closest the Ferrari had been for a very long time, and I knew that he was attacking very well. So I just had to defend this position like a madman pretty much. I just knew that I could not let P2 go or slide out of my hands. And then coming up into Vale, he tries to have a look down the inside, but we just take the semi-defensive line and park it in the middle of the track. And yeah, I think there was just some decent defensive driving on my part, but we were getting closer to the race, and it was just we are getting very critical to maintain decent pace and just maintain decent consistency, as we almost lose the rear end coming out of the last corner. And I think on lap 23 into T3, the Ferrari had been the closest it had been for the last 10 laps, and just coming out of this corner, he almost gets side by side going into T5, but we just about managed to leave him just enough room, and thankfully he backs out of that situation, because if he'd have gone for a move there, it could have been really tricky. And just 3 laps now remain, and it was just getting all the more important to maintain P2. But finally on lap 26 we managed to hold station, and just coming out of T4 on this occasion, as you'll see behind us, this was a sigh of relief, to be honest, on my part. As you can see behind us, the Ferrari loses his car and runs wide, so I knew that for this last lap at least there was going to be no pressure from anybody behind or in front of us, and we can just come around to finish in P2. And although this was not a really great or a solid drive in the wet, I think yeah, I'll have to settle with that, because with the limited experience I've had in these wet conditions, I think to not make any mistakes under pressure and to hold station, to manage to be in P2 at the end of this race was a positive, and I'll take that any day. So that was the race done, and hopefully you enjoyed that video. Do let me know in the comment section down below if you did, and just make sure you're subscribed to the channel for future videos. In terms of the championship, these 18 points I get out of Silverstone will put me closer to P2. The gap has now narrowed down to 3 points, so the objective is to win, and I think all my efforts in all my future races would be directed towards that one goal. But that would be all for the video. Thank you for watching till the end, and make sure you give this one a thumbs up and also subscribe to the channel. But until the next video, until the next time, just stay safe, stay healthy, and I will see you in the next one.